Have you ever seen someone, in just a single moment, fall from carrying a lifelong dream straight into the pit of humiliation and despair? Folks say the West is a land of second chances, but it can also be the place where one cruel word, spoken before a crowd, cuts deeper than any bullet. Tonight, I want to tell you about a dusty afternoon in Dust Creek, where the fate of an Apache woman turned down a road no one expected. Before we ride deeper into this story, let me ask you, have you ever faced that moment when the whole world seemed to turn its back on you, when silence felt sharper than a knife, and the stares of strangers weighed heavier than chains? If these opening words stir something in your heart, go ahead and tap that like button to keep these frontier tales alive. And let me know in the comments, are you listening from a quiet porch in the country, or from a still little room in the city? I promise you this, if you stay with me to the very end, you won't just hear the wind blowing through a dusty station. You'll feel the breaking of a soul denied its dream in front of everyone. That day, Dust Creek was cloaked in red dust, as if a tattered cloth had been thrown across the sky. The train screeched and ground to a halt, wheels screaming against the dry rails. The door swung open, and from the shadow inside stepped a towering figure, Marina Blackhawk, an Apache woman whose frame was broader, taller than most men. In her hand, she clutched a battered old suitcase, worn at the corners, carrying what little she had left in this world. Inside her chest, a fragile flame still flickered after the long journey. A home would be waiting, and a man would open his arms to her. But life on the frontier had its own cruel way of dealing with hope. The man who came forward was Thomas Hale, a young merchant in a crisp vest, his face polished, his eyes hard as ice. Marina slowed, her lips trembling into a shy smile. But in a heartbeat, her dream shattered. Thomas's gaze slid over her shoulders, her arms, the strong muscles pressing beneath her plain dress. His lips twisted into a bitter grin, loud enough for the whole station to hear I thought I was marrying a fine lady. Turns out I got myself a woman built like a man. Who could ever call that a wife? The words hit harder than a whip. Murmurs broke out, then laughter sharp. Merciless laughter that rolled across the platform. A child, not yet old enough to know cruelty, pointed and shouted. The giant woman, Marina, froze. Her hands trembled, yet she held tight to her suitcase. Her black eyes brimmed with tears, but she forced her chin high, clinging to the last shred of dignity. And in that instant, the world she had dreamed of collapsed around her. The man who was supposed to claim her turned his back and walked away, leaving her abandoned on the splintered bench of the station platform. The whispers cut deeper than knives. The stares wrapped around her like shackles. Marina felt herself cast out, as though she no longer belonged to humankind. The desert wind howled through the red dust, carrying away the last fragile pieces of her pride. That was the weight of humiliation heavy enough to crush the breath from her chest. No dream, no welcome, no promise of a future. Only an Apache woman left to curl into herself on a dusty bench, clutching her suitcase as if it were all that kept her from falling apart. And my friends, from that pit of despair, another story began, one that, if you follow to the end, will show you how even from the ashes of shame, a faint light can rise to guide someone out of the darkness. The echoes of cruel laughter still lingered on the platform, cutting through the red haze like knives. But there was one man who did not laugh, who did not whisper like the rest. He stood apart, gray eyes steady as steel, watching the Apache woman crumpled on the bench with her suitcase clutched tight. His name was Jonas Mercer, a middle-aged rancher who had lost his wife many years ago and had since lived alone on a barren patch of land west of Dust Creek. Jonas was not known to meddle. The townsfolk knew him as a man of few words, one who bought salt or nails at the general store and rode home without a pause at the saloon. Yet on that day, seeing Marina mocked so viciously, something stirred inside him. Perhaps it was the stubborn pride still flickering in her tear-filled eyes, a pride the crowd tried to grind into dust. Or perhaps it was because Jonas himself knew the taste of loss and loneliness, and could not stomach watching another soul be cast aside. He stepped forward, boots striking heavy against the wooden planks of the platform. The laughter faltered, then died altogether. Everyone recognized the tall, lean frame wrapped in a weathered coat, the kind of man who carried silence like a weapon. Jonas Mercer was not one to start trouble, but the set of his shoulders reminded folks he had once held a rifle in darker times. Marina looked up and met his gaze. There was no mockery there, no pity, only the stillness of stone, the eyes of a man who had already endured his share of storms. Jonas halted in front of her, let the silence hang for a beat, then spoke in his rough, gravelly voice, "Come with me." 3 words, short, blunt, but they carried more weight than a dozen threats. Marina froze, her heart pounding. Suspicion clawed at her. Was this just another trap, another humiliation? But when she searched his eyes, she found no cruelty, no hunger, no false kindness, only a quiet resolve. Jonas bent down, lifted her heavy suitcase with one hand as if it weighed nothing, and without another word, turned and walked away. His stride was slow, deliberate, steady as the desert itself. For a moment Marina sat frozen in the swirl of dust. Then, with nowhere else to go, she rose and followed. They left Dust Creek behind, swallowed in the red light of dusk. Jonas rode his horse, upright and silent, while Marina trudged beside him, bare feet torn and bleeding on the rocky road. The wind lashed sand against their faces, but she pressed on. She had no other path left. The journey stretched on until the sun dipped below the horizon. Neither spoke, only the creak of saddle leather and the heavy steps of a woman too large for the world around her. From time to time, Jonas glanced back, but he let her walk, let her prove she had strength enough to face the mockery she had left behind. At last, beneath a darkening sky, they reached a lonely wooden cabin standing in the open grasslands. The fence sagged, the barn lay quiet, but smoke still clung faintly to the chimney. Jonas dismounted, pushed open the door, and said in that same low, measured tone, less an invitation than a decree, "There's room for you here. Leave in the morning, if you wish. But if you stay, live like a human being." Marina paused at the threshold, hands tightening at her sides. His words struck her not as pity, but as something rarer, a simple offer of shelter, without judgment or shame. That night, for the first time in years, she lay beneath a roof of her own. The wooden bed was hard, the patchwork blanket thin, but it smelled faintly of sunlight. And in her sleep, there were no mocking voices, no footsteps abandoning her on a station bench, only the slow return of breath, and a fragile ember of hope flickering in the darkness. You see, rescue doesn't always come with fine words or tender gestures. Sometimes it comes with nothing more than a steady voice and a man willing to step between cruelty and the one who suffers it. That night in the desert winds, Jonas Mercer did just that for Marina Blackhawk. And because of it, instead of drowning in humiliation, she took her first hesitant step toward believing in humanity again. On her first morning at the ranch, Marina Blackhawk woke to the thin light seeping through the cracks in the wooden door. The wind swept across the grasslands, mixing with the distant crow of roosters, a sound strange to her, yet warm in its own way. The bed beneath her was hard, the patchwork blanket worn thin, but it carried the faint scent of sunlight. For the first time in years, she had slept without shivering from fear or cold. In the small kitchen, Jonas Mercer had been up long before dawn. The fire glowed red in the stove, smoke curling out through the narrow frame of the window. He said nothing in greeting, only pushed a simple bowl of bean soup toward her before turning back to slice strips of cured meat. Marina sat down, bowed her head slightly, and lifted the wooden spoon with trembling fingers. Her dark eyes lingered on the man across the table. In every movement, there was no contempt, no pity, just the plain habits of someone for whom her presence was neither burden nor spectacle. And that, more than any words, unsettled her heart. The first day stretched on slowly. Jonas led the horse out to the fields, mending a sagging fence in silence. Marina, without being asked, picked up a broom, swept the floor, straightened the crooked chairs, and stitched the torn curtain at the window. Her hands were rough and clumsy with a needle, but each movement carried determination, a quiet plea that said, "I am not useless. I belong here." By afternoon, Jonas returned with a bundle of firewood slung across his shoulder. Marina stepped out to help, her bare feet pressing against the cracked earth, leaving faint traces of blood. Jonas frowned, about to send her back inside. But when he caught the firm resolve in her eyes, he said nothing. He set the wood down, and together they carried it inside. Not a word was exchanged. Only the mingled sound of their labored breathing and the whistle of prairie wind. That night, the room was lit by the wavering glow of a kerosene lamp. Jonas sat at the table, his sun-worn face lined and hard, while the same light traced the proud angles of Marina's cheekbones. The silence between them grew heavy, until at last, Marina broke it. Her voice was low, steady but tinged with fear. "You brought me here. Out of pity." Jonas lifted his gaze, gray eyes catching the firelight. His answer was calm, almost blunt. "No, I just didn't want to watch them treat you that way." The words stunned her. All her life, she had grown used to sneers and rejection, to being told she was too much, too large, too wrong. Never before had anyone spoken to her as if she were simply human. That night, as Marina lay down once more beneath the patched blanket, a strange warmth rose within her chest. She thought of dreams long buried a home, a man strong enough to walk beside her, perhaps even a child who might one day call her mother. Once, such things had seemed impossibly far, but here, in this weathered cabin, those dreams flickered again like a fragile spark. Outside, the prairie winds moaned against the roof, wild and ceaseless. But in Marina's heart, for the first time in years, there was something steadier than fear, a small precious sliver of trust. And you see, my friends, respect doesn't always come dressed in flowery words. Sometimes it's in the silence of shared work, in a nod that carries no judgment, in the way someone lets you stand beside them as an equal. From such quiet moments, trust begins to grow, a trust strong enough to draw two wounded souls closer together, even in the harshest reaches of the American West. A week passed. Rumors about the giant Apache woman living at Jonas Mercer's ranch had spread through Dust Creek like wildfire. Some folks laughed, some shook their heads. But in the shadowy corners of the saloon, Richard Boone fumed. He had once written letters to claim Marina as if she were property. To see her now under another man's roof was a humiliation he could not bear. Boone turned to Clay Maddox, a hulking brute with a scarred face and fists like mallets, a man whose reputation for violence was well earned, with whiskey and money. Boone bought himself a weapon that afternoon. Jonas and Marina came into town for salt, nails, and a few seed packets. The sun blazed mercilessly over the rooftops, dust swirling under the horses' hooves. Conversations died mid-sentence as soon as the pair appeared. Jonas walked slow and steady, shoulders square, gray eyes scanning the street. Marina strode beside him, towering over most, her black eyes steady though her rough hands clutched the hem of her dress a little too tightly. Then Clay Maddox stepped into their path. His boots dug into the dry earth, voice rough as gravel. This woman belongs to my boss. Hand her over, and walk away. Main Street fell silent. Faces peered from doorways. Breath held. The air tightened, as if a drawn bowstring was waiting to snap. Jonas lowered the seed sack to the ground. His gaze swept past Clay and locked on Richard Boone, skulking just behind. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. She doesn't belong to anyone. She's chosen to be with me. The words struck like a stone into still water. Boone flinched, color draining from his face. Clay sneered, one massive hand curling over the grip of his Colt. Behind Jonas, Marina's heart hammered, yet in her eyes flickered something she had never felt before: safety. A man stood before her, not to shame her, not to claim her, but to shield her. Clay growled, "All right. Mercer, let's see just how much spine you've got." His fingers twitched near the pistol. The crowd froze. The wind itself seemed to stop. Jonas shifted half a step forward, his own hand hovering near the worn Colt at his hip. His lean frame looked carved from steel, his sun-lined face painted red by the dying light of day. Time stretched thin. A single spark could set off bloodshed. But Boone hissed through clenched teeth. Not here. Not now. Cowardice smothered rage. He yanked Clay's arm, dragging him back, though the brute snarled like a leashed animal. The crowd exhaled in one long breath. Respect and scorn mingled in the whispers that followed. But Boone's eyes still burned with hatred. Jonas picked up the sack of seeds and walked on with Marina at his side. Together they left Main Street in silence. Some nodded at them with newfound respect. Others shook their heads. But in Marina's heart, only one truth echoed: he stood up for me. That night, by the fire at the ranch. Marina's voice was steady, no longer trembling as before. "If you'll have me, I'll stay. I'm not going anywhere." And in the quiet of the western night, Jonas gave a single nod. It was not pity. It was not impulse. It was a simple acknowledgement that two souls, once cast aside, had found their place standing side by side. Dust Creek still buzzed with whispers after that tense afternoon on Main Street. Folks spoke of Jonas Mercer's cold gray eyes, of how he stood unflinching before Clay Maddox. Some called it courage, others a fool's pride. But in the whiskey-soaked gloom of the saloon, silence turned into something sharper, like the edge of a blade. Richard Boone hunched over his glass, eyes bloodshot with rage. The humiliation of that day cut deeper than any wound. Marina Blackhawk, the woman he had once claimed on paper as his bride, had openly chosen another man. To Boone, it was nothing short of a public slap to the face. Across the table, Clay Maddox lounged back in his chair, his scarred face twisting into a sneer. He tipped his chin and growled, "Next time. Let me finish it. One old rancher and a giant woman. They won't be hard." Boone slammed his hand against the table, rattling the bottle. "I won't let him disgrace me again. We wait for night. When Mercer's out checking his stock, we'll take him down. And the woman, she comes back with me." Clay nodded, eyes gleaming with a savage hunger. He beckoned to a few drifters at the bar, men too drunk to care and too broke to refuse. With a handful of gold coins, the plan was set: strike the ranch under cover of darkness, burn the roof to ashes, and drag Marina away in the smoke. Meanwhile, out west of town, the Mercer ranch lay quiet. Marina tied her hair back, her strong hands growing sure with chores, mending fences, stacking wood, sweeping the porch. Sometimes, when Jonas handed her a hammer or coil of rope, she let out a soft laugh. The sound startled even her. She had never believed laughter belonged to her life. Jonas sat on the porch steps, pipe smoke curling in the fading light. His eyes rested on her tall figure, moving steady against the backdrop of the red prairie sky. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone at sundown, but storms seldom send warning. Down in the valley, wagon wheels began to turn, carrying whiskey, gunpowder, and hate. Clay Maddox rode at the front, his scarred face lit by a sliver of moon, hunger for violence burning in his eyes. Boone followed close behind, hand twitching on the grip of his revolver, driven by both fury and fear. Neither man cared, or perhaps neither man knew that the night ahead would decide more than they bargained for. Back at the ranch, Marina sat by the fire when the old dog on the porch growled low. Her ears caught the faintest shift in the wind. A chill coursed down her spine. She didn't speak, only lifted her gaze toward Jonas, as if her instincts already knew this peace would not last. The night wind howled against the cabin walls, carrying the scent of dust and distant smoke, the breath of a storm drawing near. You see, in the West, grudges rarely end in silence. Behind every hateful glance lies the weight of a loaded gun. And on this night, at a lonely ranch on the prairie, vengeance was already circling, ready to erupt in fire and blood. That night, a crescent moon hung low over the Arizona sky, casting a pale silver light across the open prairie. The wind cut through the leaning fence posts, carrying the bite of dust and cold. On the porch of his small cabin, Jonas Mercer sat with his Winchester propped against the doorframe, pipe smoke drifting upward in thin gray lines. The old dog bristled suddenly, hackles raised, a growl rumbling in its throat. Jonas narrowed his gray eyes. He knew the storm had arrived. Inside, Marina Blackhawk fed another log into the fire. The moment she heard the growl, she froze, her hand still clutching a sharp kitchen knife. A lifetime of rejection and flight had left her senses honed. Her dark eyes flicked toward Jonas, seeking confirmation. He gave a single nod. In that instant, they both understood peace was over. The pounding of hooves rolled across the hard earth like war drums. Then the grind of wagon wheels followed. Figures emerged from the moonlit dust. Clay Maddox rode at the front, his scarred face twisted, voice booming like a beast. "Come on out. Mercer, hand over the woman, or burn with her tonight." A gunshot cracked, shattering the window. Glass burst into shards, firelight flashing against jagged edges. Marina did not flinch. She seized the short-barreled carbine Jonas kept by the stove, dropped to one knee, shoulders firm, and fired. A man screamed, toppled from his saddle, and hit the dirt with a thud. Jonas was already in place. His Winchester thundered, each shot precise, steady as the man himself. He moved like someone who had fought battles before, calm, efficient, lethal. Bullets tore the ground. Gunpowder stung the air, and chaos broke loose in the yard. Outside, Clay roared, swinging his heavy axe into the fence, splinters flying. He shouted for his men to throw torches. Flames leapt to the thatched roof, devouring it in seconds, lighting the night with a crimson glow. Smoke coiled upward, choking and thick. Jonas shoved a heavy table against the front door. "They're not crossing this threshold," he said, voice like stone. Marina turned toward him, her eyes fierce and burning, yet full of something new, trust. For the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting alone. The blaze roared overhead, shadows of Maddox's men dancing like demons in the firelight. Marina broke for the side door, her tall frame cutting a defiant figure against the flames. Clay snarled, drawing his pistol. But before he could fire, she was on him. One hand clamped the barrel aside, the other swung her Apache blade, flashing inches from his throat. They crashed into the dirt, rolling, grappling like wild beasts. Clay's brute strength met Marina's iron muscles. Blood streaked her shoulder, but her grip tightened, refusing to yield. Her black eyes blazed like embers, her roar echoing against the burning sky. Jonas fired from the window, dropping another attacker. The rest broke, scattering behind the wagon, fear overtaking their greed. Clay heaved, hurling Marina off, but she rose again, towering in the firelight. She locked her arms around his neck, wresting the axe from his grasp. Blood spattered the ground as her blade found its mark. His scream split the night. She drove him down, knife pressed to his throat, voice a growl. "You'll never lay a hand on me again." Jonas reached her side, smoke swirling, rifle still hot. He set a steady hand on her shoulder. "That's enough," he said, voice rough but firm. "We're alive tonight. That's victory." Around them, the roof roared in flame, embers scattering like stars, but within that fire, two figures stood back to back, bloodied but unbroken. Their home might burn, yet their bond had been forged in the crucible of smoke, steel, and survival. The surviving outlaws fled into the night, hooves fading into silence. Clay Maddox was left broken in the dirt, Boone vanishing with his shame. The ranch burned, but Jonas and Marina remained standing. And in that moment, amid fire and gunpowder, two outcasts had found their strength in each other. At dawn the next morning, pale gold light swept across the prairie, laying bare the scars of a night filled with fire and gunpowder. Half of Jonas Mercer's cabin roof had collapsed, the beams charred black. The barn walls were pocked with bullet holes, the fence splintered and broken, yet amid the ruin, one truth stood clear: Jonas and Marina were alive. And in that breath of survival, there was already a victory. Marina bent to lift burned planks from the wreckage, her strong hands blackened with soot. Blood still oozed from the cut along her arm, but she made no sound. Jonas started to tell her to rest, but when he caught the steady fire in her eyes, he held his tongue. He understood. She needed to prove, with her own strength, that this home and this life would not be taken from her. The days that followed were filled with labor. Jonas split fresh logs, each swing of the axe slow but sure. Marina hauled the heavy boards, set fence posts upright, and carried burdens that would daunt most men. At noon, they sat together at the smoke-stained table, drinking from the battered canteen. Few words passed between them. A nod, a brief glance that was enough. Some afternoons, Jonas climbed the roof to replace beams, while Marina steadied the ladder below, eyes never leaving him. When she cut her hand on a shard of wood, Jonas stopped his work at once, washing the wound and wrapping it carefully in a strip of cloth. Neither said what lingered in their hearts, but both knew in the fire's crucible. They had become true companions. From time to time, townsfolk from Dust Creek wandered by. Some pretended to buy or sell. Others only watched from a distance. Whispers followed, why would Mercer keep such a woman at his side? But when they saw the way Jonas and Marina worked an old rancher and a tall Apache woman, moving together like parts of a single machine, many fell silent. In the West, respect was earned, and anyone who survived fire and gunfights deserved it. One evening, after a long day of hauling ash and raising posts, Marina sat on the porch. The night wind carried the mingled scent of charred grass and fresh-cut timber. She lifted her gaze to the wide sky of stars, her hand resting against her chest as she listened to her heartbeat slow. Her black eyes, caught in the lamplight, no longer held the strain of fear, but a rare calm. Jonas stepped out, pipe smoke curling around him. He lowered himself onto the step beside her. For a long while, he said nothing. Then, with a quiet certainty, he spoke, "The house will stand again, and so will we." Marina turned, a faint smile breaking across her scarred face. It was not the smile of a woman mocked at a train station, nor of someone hunted by shame. It was the smile of a woman who had found where she belonged. Their triumph was not only that they had survived bullets and fire, it was that they had risen against the weight of a world that once mocked them. And with each stroke of the axe, each board set into place, they declared it plainly they would not give up. They would live, and they would live together. Autumn laid its golden hand across the fields around the ranch. The new fence stood firm, The roof held steady once more, and smoke curled from the chimney with every sunrise. In Dust Creek, the whispers hadn't died, but folks had grown used to the sight of Jonas Mercer walking side by side with Marina Blackhawk. He moved with his lean, steady stride, and she, tall and proud, her dark eyes bright, walked right beside him. No matter the murmurs, no matter the crooked smiles, Jonas never let go of her hand. He held it in the busiest part of Main Street, his gaze fixed ahead, as if to say the world might laugh, but he never would. That quiet defiance became a louder declaration than any words could have. Those who once jeered now lowered their eyes when he passed. And Marina, in each heavy but steady step, felt pride for the first time in her life, not pride in her size or strength, but pride that a man chose to stand with her openly, without apology. A month after the fire, a doctor rode in from Prescott to check Marina's old wounds. With careful hands and a knowing smile, he delivered news that lit the cabin brighter than any lantern Marina was with child. For a long moment, Marina could only sit silent, her calloused hands trembling. She had believed all her life that she was born to be cast aside, never to be called mother. Yet here it was, spoken plain, undeniable. Jonas didn't rush with words. He sat on the porch steps, pipe smoke curling upward, eyes fixed on the wide horizon. In his gray gaze, the sorrow of losing a wife and child long ago began to ease, replaced now by the vision of a child yet to come. The days that followed carried a new rhythm. Marina worked slower, but never idle. She stitched new curtains, prepared a small wooden cradle to set beside the fire, and each evening her hand rested unconsciously on her belly. Jonas, still a man of few words, showed his care in the smallest acts, chopping extra wood to keep the nights warm, bringing home herbs to ease her aches, strengthening the porch against the coming winds. The cabin was no longer just shelter. It was a home, waiting to be filled with life. News spread quickly through Dust Creek. Some muttered darkly, "A half-breed child has no place here." But slowly, those voices weakened. People saw Jonas's steady stride, saw Marina lift her head high, saw the ranch that had been blackened by fire rise again, fences straight and cattle thriving. In the harsh land of the West, one truth spoke louder than prejudice, survival, and resilience earned respect. And Jonas and Marina were writing that truth every day. One evening, as the sun bled red across the prairie, Marina sat on the porch steps, her scarred, sun-darkened face turned toward the horizon, but her black eyes shone with a light that was soft, almost tender. She turned to Jonas and said quietly, "I never thought I'd see this day. A home. A family." Jonas laid a weathered hand on her shoulder, his grip steady. He was not a man for grand speeches, but in that touch, Marina understood she was no longer alone. That night, under a sky strewn with stars, they sat together in silence. The prairie winds carried with them the echoes of hardship yet to come. They knew the whispers would never vanish entirely, and the West would always be merciless. But those things no longer mattered. They had found something stronger than all the rest, a family. And friends. That is the heart of this tale. The story of Jonas and Marina isn't just about love in a hard land. It's proof that even those cast aside, mocked and scorned, can rise again, build from ashes, and find joy. For anyone who's ever felt left behind, look at Marina Blackhawk. Once mocked as too much at a train station, now she stood as wife, mother, and the soul of a new home. If you believe love and resilience can outlast every cruel word, leave a message for Jonas and Marina. They deserve our support, because their story is not theirs alone. It belongs to everyone who's ever dreamed of belonging. And if we might offer them advice for the road ahead, let it be this: hold on tight to each other. The winds of the West will keep blowing, but together, They already hold a home stronger than any storm.